Next, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can saturate 808s using the roar distortion device. So the final 808 is going to sound like this. And before, it sounds like this. So a lot more full sounding, a little bit better mid-range presence, which helps it translate better on different types of audio systems. And also it just has a little bit more energy because of that distortion. So let's go ahead and copy over our patch here. And now let's go ahead and turn off the drums and the 808. And then we can go ahead and get started on our sounds. I'm going to change the track color on the clips here. That way just kind of all matches. Maybe change this over to blue here, just a little bit more organized. And then we can go ahead and load in a blank copy of Roar, and we're ready to start working on our 808. So the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and select the type of distortion. You can actually use multiple different types of distortion routings for an 808. That's one of the things that this device is really good at, is shaping bass sounds. But what we're going to be doing in this video is using the multiband mode. So I'm going to go over to this dropdown, go over to multiband, press on that, and then that's going to give us the ability to split everything into these different bands. So we have the lows, the mids, and the highs, and we can all process them individually. Especially with an 808, this is actually a really excellent way of doing distortion, because what I can do is really heavily saturate the mid-range and upper high frequencies, but then leave the low end intact. So that way I still have a very rich sub bass, and it gives me a lot more flexibility when going about processing my 808. So we're on the multiband mode. Let's actually take the drive down a little bit, so that way we're not overdriving our lows. And then we can go ahead and just push each of these individual upper bands a little bit later. Because right now, we're starting to get quite a bit of saturation. So let's drop that down just a couple of dBs. That way we don't overprocess anything. And then we can go through and actually kind of dial that in a little bit later. Okay, there we go. So now we have some headroom to work with. Let's also turn this down a little bit. See what the original level was here. We'll do 11.2. There we go. Okay. So we're losing a little bit of volume, but we'll make that up because we'll actually be pushing these other bands a little bit harder. Okay, so that's going to be the drive setting. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and decide where we want to set our frequency splits. Let's go ahead and turn off the mid-range and the high frequencies, so now we can only hear the lows. And we get a little bit of those kind of upper mid stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the low frequency cutoff point. We'll pull that down. So now we're just focused more on the low frequencies. I'll put that at 120. So all the sub stuff will sit on the bottom. And then for this high band, let's go ahead and adjust this cutoff point, because I just want that snap. So let's put this up to like 3K. There we go. So we just have that kind of click sort of top end of the attack transient. Then the mids, because we're all kind of the main energy of my 808 is going to hang out. And we'll go ahead and take that section and push it a little bit harder. So let's go ahead and turn on that low band. We can go ahead and make some adjustments to this. So I could saturate this really heavily with a sine shaper. And it is a nice sound, but we start to lose a little bit of that low end information. So I just want to push this just a little bit. Maybe like 8 or 9%. Because I don't want to lose any of my low end sub. I'm not looking to overly saturate the low end. We can get a lot of distortion and kind of high frequency energy out of this by pushing the mids and high frequencies a lot harder. So we'll go ahead and keep this as is. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and put this level up a little bit for the lows to help a little bit with the gain that we're losing because of this reduction in drive. One of the cool things about this multiband mode is I can actually sort of EQ my sound by deciding how much volume from each of these bands I want. So I can actually push these different levels of each of the individual bands on their own, and we could sculpt the EQ curve of our sound, which is really nice. Okay, so that's going to be all for the lows. Let's go ahead and turn on the mid-range frequencies. And for this one, we'll leave that again on that soft sine shaper. I find these work really well with 808s because we can push them really hard without losing low end and low mid information, but we start to get this upper mid frequency saturation, but it's not overly harsh sounding. So we can actually go pretty aggressive with the amount of distortion, and it sounds nice. So even if we put this all the way up, that's a lot of distortion, but it's not super harsh. So I think I like that, 42%. Let's blend that in with our lows. Now let's go ahead and take the level down just a little bit. So that way we're more focused on those low end frequencies rather than the mids, because we are adding a lot of volume with this increase in saturation. So that is all for the low and mid frequencies. And by the way, you also have the ability to adjust the filter curve, which can be really nice for shaping as well. But we'll go ahead and leave that as default state there. And then let's go ahead and head over to our highs. And this is where we can get really aggressive with the distortion and kind of dial in a really interesting texture for the overall 808. So we could again use the sine shaper, which actually sounds quite nice, especially in context with the other bands. But what I'll use for this is going to be the noise injection. So we'll turn on this and then go down to the noise injection mode. And feel free to try out these other ones as well. You can get a wide variety of different sounds out of your 808s just by changing these different options here. We'll use the noise injection. And what this does is it gives us a really interesting noise texture for my wave. You can also see that kind of visually shown here as well. But once we really start driving this, we almost get this like white noise crunch happening on the waveform, which adds this really nice texture to the 808. Now that's quite a bit of distortion. We don't want quite that much. So let's reduce that. I think 33 is nice. Let's go ahead and crank the level up just a little bit as well, so that way we can push it out in front of the other elements. So we can use that kind of as like EQ curve. So no distortion. And with it. So we can get a very distinct click happening on the top of the 808. We'll listen to that with the drums. So hearing this in context, the mix actually sounds a little bit nicer to push those highs just a little bit farther. So I went ahead and increased that amount. That's purely based on taste, but I think that kind of pushing out those higher frequencies with a little bit more distortion in front of everything has a nice sound and context with the drums. Then we can go ahead and play around with the final compression settings and the output gain. So let's play around with that compression. We could either have no compression, or we could really go wild with this. Which starts to give us a little bit more of a click at the top end. And by the way, we have the high pass frequency sidechained as well. I find this is helpful for feeding a lot of low end information into this distortion device. So that way the compressor is not being triggered by those ultra low sub frequencies. Kind of gives us a little bit more natural of a sound. So see, it really starts to squash down quite a bit when that's turned off. We start to lose some clarity in those lows, but with it, we still have a very big low end, but we can compress those upper high frequencies. I think 27 is nice in this context. Let's push that gain back up a little bit, just to kind of help level match everything. So this is before and after. So the whole 808 by itself sounds like this. And then in context with the drums, sounds like this. So we've added a lot of energy to that 808 just by changing the different types of saturation and by adjusting those individual bands. Because before, it kind of lacked some energy and excitement, and it wouldn't really hit in an actual record, but with the distortion, it's a lot more interesting. So next time you're working with an 808, whether it be a sample or a synthesized 808, I would recommend messing around with the multiband mode on the Roar distortion device, because that'll give you the ability to really dial in those sounds, to add nice high frequencies or to push the mids out of an 808, but then you can keep all that nice low end information, so there's still a nice sub frequency range inside your production. but it just gives you a lot of added flexibility that you wouldn't get with a normal saturation or just a normal distortion device. Alright, so that is all for this video on how to process 808s using the multiband distortion mode on Roar. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see ya in the next one.